Okay, back to the Shechita story. Okay, so we learned that you can't kill an animal on Shabbos, you can't kill a bug, you can't kill an insect, you can't kill anything on Shabbos, not even people. But the din of Shechita is actually causing any type of bleeding whatsoever. So for instance, what happens in Shulchan Aruch, it says, Alter Rebbe brings it down also, what happens if you make a bruise that, becomes black and blue? Now black and blue means that blood, you burst the vessel, but it's not going through the skin. So according to halacha, that's called bleeding on Shabbos. It just didn't come out, but you actually cause bleeding under the skin on Shabbos, so it also wouldn't be allowed. So in other words, if you want to punch somebody, make sure you don't get a black and blue mark, because then you're transgressing the concept of causing bleeding on Shabbos. Or drawing blood. If somebody wants to draw blood, you're not allowed to draw blood on Shabbos. Not only that, if somebody has a cut and they want to suck the blood out, you can't eat the blood, you spit it out. But I'm saying what happens is somebody they have a cut and they suck the blood out of the cut, that also is called bleeding on Shabbos. Even though it's bleeding already, but you're causing more blood to come out. So all those things are part of the malacha of Shechita, causing a bruise and things like this. Now, if the person's life is in danger, then obviously you're allowed to kill an animal. I mean, if it's, bees, or if you're in a place where a bull is chasing you or whatever. So then you're allowed to kill them, like they say, scorpions, bees, things like that. Now, if they don't cause death, but they cause severe injury, so you're only allowed to kill them if they're chasing you. But if not chasing you, you're not allowed to kill them. Now, you have to also be very careful, because sometimes you see, let's say, a bug in your sink. I mean, you can have from a vegetable, you can have a little ant crawling in the sink. So on Shabbos, you wouldn't be allowed to turn on the water to drown the ant down there, because you're killing it, or a bug or whatever it is. Not only that, let's say somebody is checking vegetables, and let's say they're checking lettuce, and they see a bug on the lettuce. So during the week, what you do is you wash it, you rinse it off, and then the bug gets off. But Shabbos, you can't do that because you're killing the bug. So the only thing you could do is take off a piece of the lettuce. You can't just take off the bug that's separating on Shabbos. You take off a little piece of the lettuce with the bug and you throw it in the garbage. But you can't wash it down, because again, you're actually killing the bug. So any way of killing bugs is forbidden. What? You don't have to assume there's a bug there. If you wash it without seeing the bug, I'll give you another example. You walk in the street, inevitably you might be killing an ant. I mean, you're walking in the street, okay? But it's not your intention to kill. I mean, there's no bug there that you know that you might be killing it. Why should I assume there's an ant walking exactly where I'm walking? Under my feet there's an ant walking. So you don't have to assume that but if you saw a bunch of bugs, let's say, and you're washing off then you're not allowed to tuck on Shabbos, because then you're killing the insects on Shabbos, which you're not allowed to. But it applies also, for instance, if somebody's gums bleed, you have your gums bleed easily. So then we were discussing once about brushing teeth on Shabbos. So we learned already you can't use toothpaste on Shabbos. But if somebody wants to, brush their teeth with a regular, just water or even liquid mouthwash, they would be allowed to, according to many opinions. But if your gums always bleed every time you every time you brush, then you can't brush on Shabbos. Even though your intention is not to make it bleed, but nevertheless, if your gums always bleed, then it's what we learned already in the past, psikresha. Psikresha means it's inevitably going to happen. I can't say, psikresha literally is an expression of the Gemara, psikresha v'lo yomas. Psikresha means I'm going to chop off the head of the chicken, but I don't want it to die. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's for sure going to die. So then in halacha it's called psikresha, chopping off the head, even though we only say half the sentence. Because if it's inevitably going to happen, you wouldn't be allowed to do it anyway. The same thing if somebody wants to floss their teeth on Shabbos, okay, without getting into some of the dinim we learned already, but you can't tear dental floss on Shabbos. You have to tear, let's say, before Shabbos. But if every time you floss, your teeth bleed, your gums bleed, so then you can't floss on Shabbos because you're causing bleeding. All these things, anything that causes any type of blood whatsoever is not allowed on Shabbos. Now, lice, we were speaking about the other day, lice, in Shulchan Aruch it says that because they don't come from male and female, you're allowed to kill them on Shabbos. It's not called killing an animal on Shabbos. That's what the Alter Rebbe also says in Shulchan Aruch. But so some of the contemporary poskim say that nowadays they know it does come from a male and a female, whatever, so they say you shouldn't kill lice on Shabbos. But in Shulchan Aruch it says clearly you could kill lice on Shabbos because they don't come from male and female. That's what the Rambam says. That's what Shulchan Aruch says, and whatever. Huh?
So there's no trapping. You put on a hat.
So there wouldn't be trapping either then. Now another issue is if somebody, let's say you want to take out a splinter. Okay, you get a splinter on Shabbos, you want to take it out. So it depends. I mean, we're not talking about life-endangering situation, because it's not. But sometimes, depending where the splinter is, how deep it is, sometimes by taking out the splinter, you're for sure going to cause bleeding. Then you wouldn't be allowed to take out the splinter on Shabbos. If it's not for sure going to cause bleeding, maybe yeah, maybe not, so then you would be allowed to take it out on Shabbos, because your intention is not to make it bleed, and it's not inevitable, it's not for sure going to happen, so then you would be allowed to take out the splinter on Shabbos. But if you know it's deep enough that if you take out the splinter, you're going to make it bleed, then you wouldn't be allowed to either. Or if somebody has a scab, okay? Sometimes, people just have a habit of pulling off scabs. I mean, it's foolish because another one's going to go anyway. But sometimes when you take off a scab, it's going to cause bleeding underneath the scab because it's not fully healed yet. So you're not allowed to take off a scab on Shabbos because it's going to cause bleeding, which again, all part of this malacha of shechita. You can't pull out teeth on Shabbos. Now I'll give you a practical example. What happens if your little kid, his tooth is falling out, he's all excited, and you want to come and pull out his tooth. Before they even know it, you just push it out, pull it out. So again, if it's not going to bleed, it's not an issue. If it's going to bleed, it's an issue because you're causing bleeding on Shabbos. So you just have to be careful with all these types of things that are going to be causing bleeding on Shabbos would be a problem. The same thing if a person wants to use a toothpick. So some people, the gums always bleed when you use a toothpick, so then you can't use a toothpick on Shabbos. If the gums don't always bleed, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, so then you could use a toothpick on Shabbos. Again, it's not the Chabad, it's very simple. If you cause doing something that's for sure going to cause it to bleed, you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. If it might bleed, it might not bleed, then you would be allowed to do it on Shabbos. Now what happens if somebody has to draw blood for medical reasons? Okay? So a lot of time, and this is, by the way, a big shayla, sometimes people have to measure their blood level, their sugar level. Okay? They have to call it up because there's ways of getting around it. But technically, if you prick your finger, then you have a shayla, you're causing bleeding. In fact, the Rebbe spoke about this, and people should be aware of this because when you're in a hospital, they do a lot of things that you really don't need to do. It could wait a day. It's not, they just do it out of routine, right? I'll give you an example. Somebody's, God forbid, in a hospital. Okay, the only reason somebody should be in a hospital is to have a baby. But let's say there's other reasons you're in the hospital on Shabbos. So they come to you in the middle of the night, they start taking blood. They're taking blood from you in the middle of the night. Why? Because that's the routine. They don't have to do it. So again, the question is, to what extent I'm not drawing the blood. The non-Jew nurse is drawing the blood. But now the question is, but I'm sticking out my hand. So now the question is that called helping them? So if they force me to hold my, take my hand and force me and I didn't do anything. But if you're sticking out your hand, I'm just saying it's issues in halacha that people should just keep in mind when they want to take your blood pressure. So years ago, the blood pressure was manual, so it was no big deal. Now it's all digital. So then you have to be careful. All these things that are done in a hospital, you should try to avoid being in a hospital over Shabbos. That's why the Rebbe said many years ago, the Rebbe came out and said that elective surgery should preferably not be done on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. We're not talking about emergency surgery you could do on Shabbos. But the Rebbe said elective surgery should preferably not be done Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the Rebbe said a few things about it. Number one, he said, there's a din in the Gemara in Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't apply to today's cruises, by the way. But the Gemara says you're not allowed to go on a boat 3 days before Shabbos, within 3 days of Shabbos. Why? This is the Gemara in Shulchan Aruch. It says, why? Because you get seasick. Those boats were on the ocean with the roar, the rowing it, or whatever it is. You get seasick. So you're putting yourself in a situation that in Shabbos you're not going to be comfortable. So it's not that you didn't do a sin, but it says in Shulchan Aruch a person should preferably not go on a boat within 3 days of Shabbos because you're putting yourself in this situation where you're going to be uncomfortable.
That was the only reason?
Yeah.
For the cruise?
No, cruise today, the ships, you don't get seasick so much. It's a whole different story. But you have to be on the ship before Shabbos. Okay, that's a whole different thing. But so now, from that din you see that you're not supposed to do things that cause you to be uncomfortable on Shabbos, discomfort on Shabbos. So if you have surgery, see those years, people didn't have in and out the same day. People stayed in the hospital for a few days. And then the Rebbe said, and so number one, you're putting yourself in a situation which you're going to cause yourself to be uncomfortable. Then the Rebbe said in the hospital they do tests on you, like we were saying, they take blood, they take your blood pressure, they take your temperature, things that are not needed to be done on Shabbos. It's not a life and danger situation. Every 10 minutes you have to take your blood pressure or whatever it may be. So again, you're causing yourself to be helping and assisting in Chilul Shabbos. Then the Rebbe said another interesting point, and the Rebbe said everybody knows that the good doctors are off on the weekends. I never said this. The good doctors, because they have priority, right? So they take off for the weekend. So who are you left with on the Shabbos calls? Then the young doctors that are not experienced as much as the others. So the Rebbe said, why would you want to put yourself in a situation when you have not such a good doctor if you can do it Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday when you have a better doctor? Those are all things, but the Rebbe said ideally elective surgery should not be done on Wednesday, if possible. But that's, but again, it all has to do with taking blood for medical purposes, draining pus and abscess, you would be allowed to. The Gemara speaks to called mapis morsa. What happens if somebody has pus? Okay, so on Shabbos you're allowed to prick it with a pin or something and take out the pus, even though some blood might come out of it, but it's not a secretion, it's not for sure going to happen. So you would be allowed to, because it's not only that the blood in the abscess has already left the bloodstream. So you're not causing blood from the bloodstream, it's already out already. So therefore that would be allowed. Again, but you have the IV line, setting an IV line on Shabbos, administering injections on Shabbos. So there's another interesting shaila. Is that people need shots. I'm not talking, God forbid, dangerous situation, we need shots. But some people take fertility shots. Some people take growth shots. Some people there's a lot of different shots people take. Yeah? So now the shaila is, are we allowed to take a shot on Shabbos? So the basic din is that if, a lot of times when you take a shot, it bleeds. A lot of times it doesn't bleed. Depends on the person. So if you're a person that when you take a shot, it doesn't bleed, so that shot you would be allowed to do on Shabbos, generally speaking. But if you always bleed, then you have a problem causing bleeding on Shabbos. So if you must take the shot and you bleed, so the way you have to do it with a shinui. You have to do it not the normal way of doing it, which is not that practical when it comes to taking shots. But I'm just saying, people have to be aware of all these various different types of things. Machat Shin is on Ma'aseh Mermech Bevel Ma'in Kim Shivla Gal Teira, and then Rakasha Mirat